Right. Now this is about the three woes of Revelations chapter 9 to 11. And it's about wokeness, the human condition, and God's wrath. But for YouTube, we'll put on wokeness and the human condition. Okay, in case you haven't noticed, the world is in chaos right now, and it's just insanity everywhere. I wish I could say I'm being hyperbolic, but it's very real for way too many people. And children even are afraid of the future. A future that may never be, or at least never deliver any hope in any meaningful way. If they had any hope of, say, the American dream, these hopes are now dashed for them. Even woke folks are not immune to the disaster going on in their minds. What if we could all work towards a liberal utopia, or just understand our real selves, and then we might perhaps see a glimmer of hope and get redemption and salvation even. Let's see what's going on in this world that's thinking about that, shall we? I just mentioned woke folk. We are most likely all aware of what wokeness is by now. Now, surprisingly, it didn't just happen all by itself. And I suggest wokeness is actually the first woe of Revelations chapter 9. This message then is not only an explanation of wokeness, where it came from and why, and also where it's heading to and what's to become of us all. But it is also a timely warning against another coming philosophy that is slated to replace this failed woke philosophy. This is the second woe, perhaps. And after that then, the final wrath of God upon the ungodly world will occur in God's timing. But you just mentioned redemption and salvation. You might be wondering why, because there doesn't seem to be much of that. Don't worry, we'll get to that. But for now, in case you haven't noticed, wokeness to anyone with half a brain is a demonic ideology straight from the pit. It comes as a cleverly designed human philosophy, and now this vain myth is ravaging society, mainly because the true Christian church has failed to live up to its ideals and kept the faith in the first place. Sure, you might even live in this world supported by a loving ecclesia of the faithful, but out there in the wider Christendom, it remains obvious that as Paul prophesied in Acts 24, I think it's Acts 24, ravenous wolves have come into the sheepfold, not sparing the flock. So now we have the situation in which mainstream Christianity is becoming widely rejected and even being blamed for societal ills. Churches are now becoming targets for bombing and arson in the United States even. Woe unto us all then. The church was once the protector of the poor, and it was often seen as a religious glue of faith and family. But now woeful or woke new age philosophies are being trotted out and tried out on Western society in the main. And of course, we all are the guinea pigs, or as some say, lab rats. Church attendance is down to the lowest levels ever recorded in the West, as has unbelief in God having doubled in a decade. As we can all see, wokeism has recently been trialled on Western society, but that vain philosophy has failed and is failing miserably, with a great deal of suffering being left in its wake. I claim it has caused a plague of depression and psychological misery, even to the point of causing an increase in all-cause deaths. The life expectancy in the US is currently down by 30%, and violent crime is up a fair bit, and murders are up a whopping 30%. It could very well be that now, with a great deal of the population of the West being spiritually and mentally stung, that the first woe of Revelations 9 has passed and the second and worst woe is coming. The Bible teaches that the true church is not destined for wrath, but it can't fully escape the first two woes described in the chapter of the book of Revelation. So Christians should find solace in the words of the Apostle Peter, who in 1 Peter 2:16 says, "For we did not follow cleverly designed myths when we made known unto you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. For we have been eyewitnesses of his majesty," meaning at the transfiguration, of course. But this means it's true because we have seen his glory and majesty. We know it's true. In a quick analysis of this passage, we can see that after the obvious accent on the word myths, which means any idea other than the true gospel that Peter has preached, the next two words that should leap out at us are power and coming. The first means the power to save, and the second is at the parousia, when the faithful saints will be received to glory in heaven. Furthermore, Paul also warns believers in Colossians 2:8 to not be deceived by human philosophy and vain deceit. In many other places in the Word, we are likewise warned against idolatry, false gods and false religions. I would like you to know right here that my target audience is Western Judeo-Christian, which is really a misnomer. But I won't get into that or broach the subject of other religions here. They have enough problems of their own, mainly being not acceptable to reach or appease God. After the second coming, however, we should be aware that the wrath of God will be poured out upon the whole of faithless mankind, and that will include all those who don't adhere to the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, no matter what else they believe. The first woe. So where did this insane wokeness come from? I will explain, but I first need to take you back in history. Recorded human philosophy since before Plato, philosophy accepted the idea that the human condition would always remain in a sad state, without hope in the world. This was a situation that came to be expected because the philosophers thought that mankind was made in the beginning to be just like animals. Yes, animals, albeit with intelligence. The idea was that mankind still retained vestiges of animalistic behaviour, even though we also learned to talk. So the thinking went. And this genetic throwback is supposed to be that which drives man to be animalistic himself, and even worse than that, his brute, selfish desires and animal lusts won't allow him to live up to his best thought out ideals. And because of that, he is destined to remain in a state of angst and see himself as a guilt-ridden failure. He is prone to fall prey to any number of temptations in spite of his intellect. You've heard of smart, stupid, right? Well, sometimes I think that describes me. But it describes everyone at times. Because of this, many and varied social controls were invented to keep society in check. However, left to his fancies, mankind gets worse, and without much help from Satan, many human beings indulge themselves in all manner of depraved behaviours, in the end leading to the breakdown of society, leaving both society and its defunct individuals sorely in need of redemption or salvation of some kind. Theories of origins like evolution have certainly not helped man's understanding of his true value in any manner, and to most it all remains a mystery. So when all else failed, another hope for humanistic salvation, according to the new woke dialectic, began its rampage through Western culture by not only allowing but outright encouraging deviance by wokeness, being the psychologically controlled devolution of human behaviour to where we might all arrive at an acceptable compromise of basement depravity versus law. The mouthful. This was supposed to work out for our good by thrusting upon us a more liberal but socially acceptable array of behaviours, where we would go all in for sin, so to speak, and we would then be only lightly policed by a suitably derived set of woke humanistic laws. This bespoke leniency has backfired and is right now in the new year beginning 2023 promoting a great deal of crime and perversion, which in spite of being made more acceptable by the changing of words and meanings, which of course is just the replacing of well understood descriptive terms for evil, to make evil sound nicer. And it's running amok in society. Debauchery has now become enabled through wokeness by the almost complete disregard of the nation's laws, followed up with tepid enforcement at best. The irresponsible architects of wokeness stupidly assumed that this would somehow keep us all in check. In other words, the solution for the human condition would be achieved by people no longer being required to meet the impossibly high standards of both societies and especially God's laws. So their satanic presumption decided that humankind would feel less guilt and anxiety, and the human condition would then become stabilised resulting in a more peaceful society. So the thinking went. Thinking in a nutshell. The theory behind this is if we allow immoral behaviours and legalise most of them, people will feel better about their depraved behaviour and see it as normal. And then they won't suffer from guilt and anxiety, will they? They will now become happy and free, saved from their human conditions of guilt and shame. Whoopee-duck. The original Marxist philosophy behind that, of the 19th century, ended up destroying the Soviets. But it still progressed in the West, where it was massaged and westernised to end up with this shockingly destructive final solution of wokeness. Wokeness is actually a philosophical theory of American philosopher Stanley Cavell. But having been employed for a couple of decades, it has finally imploded, and now wokeness is causing more depression, anxiety and guilt in the population than it was supposed to solve. And many more people have become suicidal, but mostly they are hitting the drug cabinet and overdosing, often by mistake. Illicit drugs and crime is also sending people to the gutter in droves, leaving homeless multitudes in a hopeless situation. Insanity seems to be the best outcome to be expected in lieu of suicide. Many think they have been misgendered, that being in the wrong body is the source of all their problems. So many commit to gender change operations in their childhood and youth even, or at least they become trannies at a surface level to try and solve their problems. So if that original wokeness wasn't bad enough, it seems the lunatics are surely running the asylum, and we are now experiencing the final drive to even further depravity down along the same ridiculous line of thinking. Wokeness for those insane or pathological philosophers seems to never be still, and now, so long as physical violence and hate speech can be squelched, further improvement seemed to remain possible with some smart tinkering. So of course it soon became obvious to the woke tricksters that the complete reversal of God's Judeo-Christian laws in particular would be the final solution. A reversal of God's Judeo-Christian laws in particular would be the final solution. It had been there in plain sight all along. That should do the trick now for sure. So their stinking thinking now goes something like this. If people feel guilt and shame by disobeying biblical law, especially the Ten Commandments, then surely if all the moral law breaking that humans do was now to become legalised, and in turn all the good behaviour people aren't allowed to do becomes frowned upon and even made illegal, then surely mankind's psychiatric problems will now be solved. Whoa, that's some strange logic, huh? Whoa. So to be clear, the wokeness now is, we can all be free to do evil with a clear conscience because evil has now become the law. They have arrived at evil is good and good is evil. They don't seem to be aware that God said in Isaiah 5:20, woe unto those people who call evil good and good evil. Read that again. What did he just promise them? Right, he promised them woe. The first woe, perhaps. Stupid Christians seem to be going along with this wokeness even, with their own Christian version. Woke TV evangelists are teaching that we can't even sin anymore as Christians because we are not under law anymore, we are under grace. Such foolish Christians in the Apostles' day were saying, as we read in Romans 5, let's sin more so we can have more grace. And just as foolishly, woke Christian folk today are saying, let's have more sin and bad behaviour validated and made acceptable, up to a point of course, so we can all feel even less shame and anxiety and get away with certain things, and in so doing solve the problem of our guilt and angst-ridden human condition also. That's not how we lose our shame as Christians. We lose it because after we have confessed sin and are forgiven, we realise that Jesus has borne our shame for us on the cross. That's how we get rid of our shame. Wokeness is not for Christians. But this, what some Christians are thinking, is just what the philosophers thought. Strange bedfellows, huh? They thought this reversal of God's way was bound to solve society's ills by healing the majority of the world's personal psychiatric conditions. So may we ask, what demonic philosophy from the pit did this woeful idea in any form at all come from? We have already discovered that answer. Just to reiterate, we discovered that this kind of godless humanistic thinking really began 170 years ago with the rise of the Marxist philosophy. And we also found it has since given birth to its modern child, American Marxism, or in one word, wokeness. The original Marxist philosophy of Karl Marx led to Soviet and other styles of godless communism that resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people, and its humanistic political intrigues almost destroyed the Soviet Union. However, America and the West remained some sort of a holdout as they clung to the so-called Judeo-Christian God, guns and religion. And this extended to and was grounded in the further adhesion to God through the sanctity of the family unit and the local church. This worked to some degree, but unfortunately it wasn't long before Marxist philosophy began to overtake the educational system writ large, and the very idea of God, or at least his ability to save people and the world in general, seemed to be getting tossed out at an ever-increasing pace. This was because God was seen to be a real killjoy when compared to the humanistic science God, who now offered a proliferation of wonderful technologies and aids, especially to service our once frowned upon enjoyment. Even without wokeness yet, we found to our delight we could enjoy a plethora of tech delicacies from the private of our own homes where nobody could see us. Then with science and its self-enjoyment becoming widely available to all in an amazing handheld device, quirky scientific theories and a self-help culture gained more steam. This resulted in any vestige of godliness remaining in society becoming reduced to the low levels and moral decay we have all witnessed. This falling away has been ignored by the masses because not only was the humanistic science God even promising to give mankind eternal life in some future scientific development or invention, it also now proposed to solve our human condition. While we all engage in hedonism, just pretending to fix the planet. It's an Earth really, but that's another story. This is all while we wait for Elon Musk's chip in our brains under the control of AI and quantum computers. Nice, huh? This worship of science and entertainment has led to even more severe moral decay, and we have now ended up with the results I described before. Such an ignoble end has thrust men into a more impoverished human condition of felt guilt, hopelessness and much sorrow. But in spite of woes, mankind still didn't repent and turn to his Maker, and now the West is totally absorbed by its own humanist political intrigues towards transhumanism and a globalist technocratic society, a society without God. That's all I've got to say about politics, but we have to seriously ask ourselves as Christians, is it possible God has sent wokeness upon the Western world as the first woe? I'm aiming this address more broadly to the ordinary middle to lower class Westerners. Your perverse and greedy leaders and power elites both are already depraved liars and deceivers, especially the three-letter intelligence agencies along with the swampy government. Well-connected corporations and other rich and powerful beings are also included. These fallen beings also include those running media and tech platforms. I can't recognise many of these people as human. How can I? They are bald-faced liars, deceivers and warmongers, and I believe many are even murderers or at least war criminals. They pad their pockets with ill-gotten gains and steal the people's wealth. They are disgustingly wicked beyond knowing, so it seems their halls of power are well populated with demonic beings and even watchers, having a great deal of power and influence. They seem to hypnotise the masses and are often just questionably human, and most are very alien to folks like you and me. Hell has a special place for those influencers and philosophers who have sold their souls to the devil and have so found a personal escape from the terrible angst and depression that has fallen upon the rest of mankind. They find temporary salvation by the heady drunkenness of power. It has rightly been said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. One or two power elites I can think of are surely insane as well. The woke sounds like you could spell it W-O-E-K-E. Woe. The woke Marxist philosophy now allows naturally evil folks to engage in all sorts of moral depravities, and by them all jumping into the cesspit together, evil even becomes more acceptable by such populism, and this woke ideology is supposed to be their redemption. Give humans allowance to do evil such as soldiers in a war, and they will take evil to heart and act accordingly. How can that redeem us all? Philosophers attempt to envisage their theories' effects on the actions of the masses. So maybe it's really the society as a whole which is hopefully to be saved. Or even worse, maybe it's just to be the saving of the earth without humans at all. Who knows? In any case, such redemption is not at all likely to be achieved by having its denizens gleefully elevate darkness above light for starters. See again Isaiah 5:20. The people are only enjoying the legalisation of selfish behaviour at first, then attempting to salve their consciences by the application of a mixture of hypocritical virtue signalling, such as an outward showing of acceptance for depraved minorities, diversities, multi-genders and other intersectionalities, with equity for all. They especially need to use the buzzwords, safe places and the right pronouns. Misgendering is a horrendous evil, while lying and murder are even becoming more acceptable, even for vain and selfish reasons. The ends justify the means is an old but apt refrain to these people. These people's taste buds have gone all awry to the point that the bitter is deemed to be sweet and the sweet has become bitter. Once again, Isaiah 5:20. Wokeness is supposed to be a modern improvement to Marxist philosophy because that didn't work too well wherever it was tried in the world. So it came to be seen as a failed ideology. Notwithstanding this, it was thought in academia that Marxism could work if it was tinkered with, and the woke ideology they came up with can really be called American Marxism, but under the banner of so-called democracy. Christians should vote, but never push for a theocracy. That's not going to happen. Come out of Babylon, my people. You should know what I'm talking about. At first, this woke ideology was planned to operate in a multicultural and hopefully borderless open society by first killing off the felt bitterness caused by the idea of God and religion. Having done that, they sought to sophisticate the basic evils and so freed the populace to happily follow their traditional animalistic desires for sex, food, shelter and protection. Of course, sophistication meant abusing our basic drives for self-serving interests, including nurturing. But of course, with the masses pretending to work together for the common good of all diversities and cultures, all except Christians or any sensible ones, of course. I think it is, something like that. It's controlled by moneyed elites, but totally unimportant really. However, the utopian goal of American Marxism can be summed up by this. In this day and age, a totally selfish and hypocritical pretense of a fully modern social congruence is sought for the masses by wokeness. Also, this basically new American utopian dream now includes a multicultural vision by invasion that is cynically sought to create a voting bloc of necessity for the evil ones to retain power through uniparty democracy. So apart from godlessness, lawlessness has also risen in the capital by all means thought necessary. The second woe is coming. Unfortunately and woefully, rather than giving absolution to the human soul by having it find solace in the realisation of such a sweet, woke, utopian lifestyle, it became obvious before very long that woke leads to broke. So it would seem this woe really does have some sting in its tail. It is now causing death by degrees, and if we don't get destroyed in a nuclear holocaust because someone's societal congruence isn't somebody else's, those deadly degrees will close up from the ends. We can already see. These ends are, but not limited to, abortion before and at birth, right through murders, suicide, wars, starvation, weather, pandemics and the like. The other end is assisted suicide near the end of life. This second woe can be seen to be worsening towards a further increase in death by all means. All this can have the effect of enabling the idea of mass deaths to gain wide acceptance over time in order to save the earth first and then what's left of the human race from extinction. There couldn't be a more noble cause, right? Well, that might be so in your insane head, but whoever wants their children to go first, raise your hand. So then, summing up, wokeness is a totally godless myth, and the end thereof is psychosis, rage-filled insanity, and most likely a coming drug or alcohol-fueled death in the now, followed quickly by eternal death in hell for its devotees and victims alike. To wrap this up further, it's turned out that the adept ones running the satanic experiments finally realised that such a Marxist-style philosophy couldn't save us at all, that it only served to increase human suffering. So now they've upped the ante with a renewed scientific approach to somehow provide some sort of redemption and salvation from the human condition. So in response to the original problem of the church and God getting in the way of Marxism's dark globalist plans, woke philosophy was invented as explained. Unfortunately, this has likely triggered the first woe, which is fully earned suffering, being stung by the demons of the fruits of godlessness. So now mankind's human condition has become even worse, and utopia is slipping further from their grasp as more and more people are becoming psychologically damaged and are now heading in droves to psychiatrists in the drug cabinet. And many others are being driven to madness, and now we even have assisted suicide for those people who can't stand it anymore. Even those who were outwardly living lives of wokeness and comfort are being affected. Everyone knows of someone suffering badly. Woe has indeed come upon our world, and more woes are coming. The powers that be in the medical science world are kind of panicking at the terrible results of their woe-filled experiment. Millions of people are now depressed, psychotic, and on the drugs of all kinds. Culture shocked, suicidal, and very angry. More and more people end up living in all kinds of filth and depravity, and the good folk and even Christians are being damaged to the point that some Christians are falling away also. This too has been foretold. So this first woe of torment was causing such alarm that in came the think tanks again, and it must have been decided while gathering around in the depths of Satan to come up with a new moral code that still followed the original reversal of God's moral law, but now this new satanic law was going to be added to with a whole new set of soft morals and woke behaviours that people could easily follow, and in so doing they might then feel much better about themselves. If they can find themselves doing some virtuous deed or two perhaps. So wokeness has now come to its zenith, and this is the last act. Along with the dismissal of any creator God to be worshipped, they have given themselves the ability to murder where allowed, and ditto stealing. Lying and cheating have become normalised, along with the acting out of lusts and debauchery of all kinds, with a holdout or two. They have now come up with a few feel-good positive deeds to follow, like getting to carbon zero, looking after their rescue animals, and picking up rubbish and dobbing others who litter. They either walk or drive electric cars and have solar panels on their roofs. Well, I guess we've all got those, but they even give to woke causes. Now we see that all this was thought to help folks feel better about themselves, as they virtue signal such do-gooding all over the place, removing and changing vocabulary that might declare to be racist or hate speech. This was because they couldn't stop hating for real. Again, in some sort of retrospect, this evil progressivism to woke Marxism and cancel totalitarianism was fueled by academia, and it really came about through egotistical professors and philosophy majors, and it became vocalised strongly in the Black Lives Matter movement first, where fascism was allowed to flourish. The schools and universities really need to be cleaned out, but that won't happen because they won't repent. So fascism even allowed people to blow off their rage and angst in the streets. And then after all this, if this wokeness worked, they all should have felt really good about themselves. well-centred in the new woke society, and then hopefully settling into living pleasurable lives without angst or guilt, joyfully accepting of all and sundry, except Christians, of course. Woke mayors even let criminals out of jail and marched in the streets with the Antifa-fascists, virtue signalling their obvious acceptance and support for the new way. Woke elites were seen to be quite accepting of other people's bad behaviour while showing them the way of wokeness. In the Bible, 1 Timothy 4, 1-5 is particularly apt and completely describes these deluded people and what they are doing. Yet Paul in that passage also provides an out for them. He says, and I'll paraphrase a bit, the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will leave off with the faith and follow deceiving spirits and things taught by demons. Such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared with a hot iron. They forbid or work against heterosexual marriage and straight marriage in general, and they demand abstinence from meats. There is a strong push right now against eating beef. Abstinence from meats, which God gave to be gratefully received for those who believe and know the truth of the gospel. That truly describes these folks, yet the last sentence holds out an escape for them. They must believe God and his truth. Unfortunately, after all this experimentation with what God calls evil, many have already seared or are right now in the process of frying their consciences. Just like Paul warned Timothy in that passage of his epistle. That's the likely reason that the rate of mental illness is in such antichrist and woke populations is now seen to be going through the roof. Insane means having no conscience, so not surprisingly science, that seems to get everything wrong by the way, also seems to be helpless to provide any redemption from the current worsening of the epidemic of mental illness and extra deaths occurring during this woeful end. Such a painful and stinging end is to be found in the worsening of the human condition. Just before we go to the scriptures again and discover the second woe, we'll take a quick look and have a good laugh at what science is trying to do about this stinging defeat first. So it seems that any solution other than mass murder/suicide by total nuclear annihilation now appears to be imperative to the philosophers and the think tankers and the peer-review-driven scientific community as a whole. Right now an unseen war is raging, and their god of science is in as much danger as they themselves. And yes, they actually have elitist meetings and discussions around the problem of the loss of credibility in science. Such a damaging credibility gap is truly threatening right now because science is running out of good things to offer and people are just not going to believe in the promised salvation by their climate change alarmism and 0% carbon theology for much longer. Their sacred science is starting to look like the emperor without clothes. Considering all this, out went the All Points Bulletin around the scientific world just a short while back. And now, just in the nick of time, enters stage left an Aussie named Jeremy Griffiths, holding aloft the holy grail of another more worthy philosophy. The old woke Marxist one obviously doesn't work too well, so now it's about to be superseded by what may very well be the second woe. And that will be the topic for next week, the second woe. Thank you very much for being with us today. God bless those he wants to bless. Amen.